It's time
for 15 minutes of non-stop MMA, tackling the biggest news in the sport. Head into the chat and let us know how you feel. Live from Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, here's your host, Craig Allen.
All right, and welcome to the latest episode of Fight Night Picks Kicks. You can barely even see me. Hey, the sun's moved. Should have turned the lights on to start, but hey, I'm excited about this episode. We've got a lot to talk about here today. Listen, we had UFC Rio Rancho last night. We had Blachowicz versus a tough out in Corey Anderson in the main event. You had all the craziness with Diego Sanchez, Michel Pereira. You had Brock Weaver, Kazula Vargas kind of end in questionable fashion. All sorts of stuff. I'd like to get your opinions on those matters and more over in the chat. Make sure you hit it up. And again, as always, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. Now, let's set the ground rules for what an episode of Fight Night Picks Kicks is all about. Maybe this is the first time you're joining us. We really appreciate that you do. Listen, the channel's grown leaps and bounds in the last couple of months, and podcasting is where we started, and it's what we always like to get into. So today, we're going to get into the first topic, illegal knees. You had 2 fights end with illegal strikes. First time that's happened. Crazy stuff that you've had 2 illegal knee strikes ending in disqualifications that we saw in our co-main event, as well as Brock Weaver in his UFC debut against Kazula Vargas. So I'd like to get the thoughts on the illegal knees. There's a lot of people out there that are saying, hey, Diego Sanchez quit. There's a lot of people saying very mean things about poor Diego Sanchez. We'll get to those, and again, like to get your thoughts there. We also have Blachowicz versus Corey Anderson. Does that set up our second topic of Blachowicz versus Jones? A lot of people think it might. We'll get into that. We also have NEF 42 at 265 pounds, and that one's a neat topic because there's some crazy stuff that happened at NEF 42. I was there live last weekend covering the fights in Portland, Maine, and a little bit of a storyline there, so we're going to get into that. We're going to watch the fight together. We're going to recap it. We're going to talk about it, and we will get into that. Then, looking ahead, that's the next topic. We're going to look ahead at a full slate of fights. You've got 2 Bellator cards. You've got UFC coming at you from Auckland, New Zealand. Great card there. And then, as always, in the last bit, your Fight Night picks. I want to hear from you, see what you're thinking on all of these different topics. So we started a little bit early here on a Sunday afternoon with illegal knees. And it's very important that we start with that because if you look back at our fight card yesterday, there were UFC debuts. We had such fighters as Shanna Young making a short notice debut. We had, of course, Daniel Rodriguez and Tim Means. And then you had Brock Weaver on the main card, our third fight on the main card after Venata and Borg getting wins. You have you have Brock Weaver taking on Kazula Vargas. And Matt and I profiled it. We said, listen, Brock Weaver, he's going to have a size advantage. He's fought his last 3 fights at welterweight. He won a contender series at welterweight. He's coming into this fight against Kazula Vargas, the bigger fighter, full head of steam. A lot of people really excited about this debut. What are we going to get out of Brock Weaver? And man, Kazula Vargas actually looked pretty good. For the first, I want to say 4 minutes. Let's say 4 minutes of this fight. Kazula Vargas was in charge. He looked great. And then there were another 2 seconds where Kazula Vargas threw the illegal knee. Brock Weaver was seated on the mat. He was a downed opponent. Kazula Vargas knee to the head. Referee looked a little hesitant. A lot of people were pretty quick to praise him. It was what it was. Web TV says this was so boring of an event. I agree with you. Pacing was kind of weird. It was an ESPN Plus event, but name value-wise, the card wasn't all that great. And maybe there was a little bit of excitement. I mean, you look at it. The Lando Venata, the Medeiros fight. I'm glad you brought that up. The Venata Medeiros fight didn't really. It was pretty anticlimactic. I mean, Lando Venata did his best Dominic Cruz shuffle, switching stances, peppering in a couple shots, backing up. Medeiros planted his feet. DC put it best. He planted his feet and then he threw a 1, 2, maybe, or 1, 2. He wasn't really throwing combos. And then in the next fight, Ray Borg absolutely poured it on Rogerio Bontorin. But again, weighed in at 128. So what does that mean with the rankings? You can find my rankings at Hardcore Rank over on Twitter. We're putting out every single week our rankings, so you can check those out. Agree with me, disagree with me. It's another place that you can argue with me. But Brock Weaver, Vargas, yeah, that one, it just got squirrely. So Brock Weaver saying that they should run it back. He said that today. I was pretty interested in seeing that. And Vargas, let's see what he says. But then what we're talking about, and the reason why that topic's up there, illegal knees, it's because of our co-main event. Michel Pereira comes out with the funky dance moves. Diego Sanchez comes out, and like Mick Jagger, he was just strutting his stuff. I mean, you had Diego Sanchez walking around the cage, and everybody laughs, and they say, look at this guy, he's a fool. He's got a mentalist as his coach. He's got this inspirational guy. He's ditched Jackson Wink. He's doing his own thing at Diego Sanchez fight team. How weird of a spectacle is this? So you see him peacock. You see him do weird stuff. You see him do weird stuff before the fight. You see this. This has kind of been the plan over his last little bit. And I want to remind you too, since 2018, Diego Sanchez is 3-1. I mean, how crazy is that? Diego Sanchez is 3-1 in the UFC. I can think of plenty good fighters who don't have that good of a record in the UFC. I mean, Rafael dos Anjos, mind you, he's been fighting tougher competition, but Diego Sanchez, I mean, his only loss in his last 4 fights was to Michael Chiesa, who beat Rafael dos Anjos. So it's just interesting to note there. But Michel Pereira dominating the fight, led in total strikes in the first and second rounds. He was able to get a couple of takedowns. In the third round, he was really pouring it on. Looked like he was just throwing gas on a fire. Michel Pereira en route to a decision win. I threw it up here on YouTube because I've been adding in the result on the prediction. So you can, if you click on it, then you can see, hey, this is what happened in the fight. These two donkeys don't know what they're talking about. Or, hey, these guys picked Daniel Rodriguez. They're savants. But realistically, I wrote it down as Michel Pereira en route to a great decision win, whatever, and I left it there. And I'm glad I did leave it there because, of course, you had the illegal knee. It happened at 3:09 of the third round, and a couple people hit me up. One was here on YouTube. Another one was over on Twitter. And the first reaction I got was the UFC and the referee don't know what they're doing. What are they doing? And then it became a question of, well, what are the rules actually? And that's kind of what I wanted to dive into because in New Mexico, they have not adopted the unified rules of MMA and they had not adopted the use or limited or full use of replay. These are unified rules of MMA and they're not unified in certain states. They're not unified globally in certain regions. That's a top priority. I mean, set the illegal knee aside. These unified rules of MMA have to be adopted to be made unified. So it'd be nice if every commission, every state, and every province, if they were adopted, but they're not. So we have to work with what we have. But a downed opponent is a downed opponent. I mean, it used to be with the old rules that you see. A perfect example is Chris Weidman when he fought Gegard Mousasi, and you saw the hands go down and fight's over. Gegard Mousasi goes over to Bellator. So you look at this one, Diego Sanchez had a knee down. That counts as a grounded opponent, and Pereira illegally struck him. Now, Jason Herzog called a timeout. He did the right thing. Jason Herzog did such a perfect job in handling the situation because it was chaotic. I mean, you had Diego Sanchez that started to bleed from a cut on top of his forehead near his hairline. Pereira went back in the corner. He was smiling. He was talking. He fully expected to win the fight. And you just had a slew of fans booing and cheering, and there's so many hometown people there for Diego Sanchez, an Albuquerque guy, and Jason Herzog did what he was supposed to do. Do you want to continue? Do you not want to continue? And yeah, maybe the reasoning from Diego Sanchez wasn't all that great, but he got absolutely beaten up in that fight. And you got to realize, this is a guy that, A, he's in the UFC Hall of Fame, albeit for a fight that he had against Clay Guida a few years ago, but he's a UFC Hall of Famer. B, this is a guy that's fought in 4 different weight classes. One of only 2 people in the UFC to fight in 4 different weight classes. 145, 155, 170, and 185. This guy is a pioneer of the sport. He was on The Ultimate Fighter Season 1. It's crazy that people just came out of the woodwork to just slag on this guy. Yes, it's unfortunate the way that the fight went, the way that the fight ended. But man, you can't. I'm surprised nobody's upset at Kazula Vargas. It was just as egregious. I mean, Brock Weaver was seated on the canvas, back against the cage. Vargas threw an illegal knee. So I was just surprised at the reaction that we got for just Diego Sanchez. Everybody seemed to throw Brock Weaver and Kazula Vargas out the window, and more of an emphasis was made on Sanchez. And yeah, it was unfortunate the way that the fight ended, but that's just the way it is. An illegal knee is kind of crazy there. So if we head into the chat, Brian Jenkins in the chat. Sanchez popped right up. Didn't even look stunned. It's his choice, but for sure made him look bad. Yeah, it definitely did. It definitely didn't look all that great on Diego Sanchez, especially the fact that he was seemingly justifying the fact that the cut, there was blood, and the fact that, just due to the fact that the knee was illegal. All right, I'm out. So interesting there. Oliver Sell, thanks so much for joining in the chat, as you seem to do every single week. Really appreciate it. You think it's time for the UFC to introduce a mandatory ranking system? Say, like, if you're the number one ranked guy, beating a top 5 guy, you get a title shot, i.e. Yoel Romero, Jose Aldo. Well, you know how I feel about Yoel Romero and Jose Aldo getting title shots. I mean, Yoel Romero's 1-3 in his last 4. Jose Aldo's lost 2 in a row. And his record lately salty, but he is fighting some of the best fighters in the world. That's a tough one. This is an entertainment business, and it's a little bit less strict as boxing is with mandatory challengers. Would I like to see it? Maybe not. I would like to see a little bit more oversight with UFC rankings, and I pump the tires of the Hardcore Rank over on Twitter. I'm a part of it. Different media minds like MMA Nerd, Ashley, she's over there. Marcel Dorf, Drake Riggs. A lot of people were coming up with these rankings. And again, if you want to disagree with us, go ahead. But that's the neat idea there. But if you go into the UFC's website right now, there's other good websites too. Fight Matrix, Ranking MMA, they do a great job. I normally go to those. But if you look at the UFC's rankings right now, it used to be where you used to be able to click and see who the panel was voting for. And now you can't. Trent Reinsmith brought that one up a couple weeks ago. I thought it was interesting because there's less of an oversight and less of a conversation dialogue that can happen between fans, between people looking to, make matchups. And it's funny. I mean, it's really tricky too with UFC's rankings. Like I've talked about it before. When Israel Adesanya fought Anderson Silva, before that fight, Anderson Silva was unranked, and I said, you watch, there's going to be a name or a number next to Anderson Silva's name before that fight, even before he was scheduled to take on Adesanya. You watch on that card, Anderson Silva's going to have a number next to his name. It's totally arbitrary. It's just a way to sell pay-per-views. And lo and behold, Anderson Silva was a ranked opponent when he went into that. So would I like to see a mandatory ranking system? No. But would I like to see some sort of oversight, some sort of, system of checks and balances with them? Yes, I would. I think that makes sense. So, Oliver, you bring up a really good point. Plus, somehow Aldo's ranked 5th at bantamweight. That's because it's rigged. And if the promotion controls their own ranking system, then they can do whatever they want in theory. Web TV also says, I would like to see Sean O'Malley versus Aldo. Sean O'Malley's been out for a long time. I mean, he's got to take on, one of those 135ers that isn't ranked. I wouldn't even say, because 15, if I'm not mistaken, like you've got Montel Jackson in the mix. You've got really good fighters around, between, let's say, 20 and 10, concentrated around 15. I'd have Sean O'Malley fight somebody that's not in the top 15 just yet. I don't think Jose Aldo is quite there. I mean, Jose Aldo dropped a split decision, and, I don't like the fact that he's going to get a title shot off a loss, but dropped a split decision to the former title challenger, Marlon Moraes, who made it very difficult on him. So I don't think Sean O'Malley's quite there yet. But that's an interesting take, and I like it. So the second topic for this week's question mark kicks, Blachowicz versus Jones. Jan Blachowicz is not pillow-fisted. I know that was one of the comments that was out there on YouTube. Jan Blachowicz is not pillow-fisted. Go back and watch his last 3 fights. 2 of them ended in finish. Knocked out Luke Rockhold, questionable chin, moving up a weight class, and then he beat Jacare Souza in a close fight. I had Blachowicz winning that fight. I know in the moment a lot of people thought it was very close, but Jan Blachowicz winning that one. And then, of course, Jan Blachowicz comes out and absolutely starches Corey Anderson. Does he get a title shot? That's my question to you. Does Jan Blachowicz get the title shot against John Jones? John Jones just defended last weekend against Dominic Reyes. It was very close, and a lot of people were quick to point out on Twitter, and I agree with them. Hey, if you're John Jones, this is the smartest play that you can do. You go home, you rest up for a week, and then you sit front row because you know that the winner of that main event is going to want your belt. And you want no part of Dominic Reyes. So very smart on John Jones' part of sitting front row, going along with the whole thing. Yeah, Blachowicz is the guy, Blachowicz is the guy. And then does he move up to heavyweight and take on Stipe Miocic, or maybe Stipe fights DC and you wait for the winner of that fight? Kind of awkward also because DC has the mic there interviewing Jan Blachowicz, but all in all, great scene. Jan Blachowicz, I mean, he's 7-1 in his last 8 fights. Bryant says if it's not going to be Reyes rematch next, and yes, I agree. I think Jan Blachowicz, I mean, listen, he's over 35, former KSW light heavyweight champ. He's grown and morphed into a very complete mixed martial artist. To me, the fight that was most telling was when Blachowicz fought Nikita Krylov. I was so hot and bothered that Krylov was coming back to the UFC, and he had a good stint in Fight Nights Global. It was a shame to see him leave the UFC, and then he was finishing guys. He's a submission specialist, but he also gets submitted, and then Jan Blachowicz looked great in that fight. So, to me, very complete fighter. Really looking forward to that one, and it should be a good fight, and hopefully, again, Blachowicz gets the title shot. I'll head into the chat. Web TV says, do you think that we can see Stipe versus Jones in 2020? I think it's entirely possible. It just gets a little iffy because look at light heavyweight and run through the names. If we're going based on the rankings from last week, number 1, Dominic Reyes. They just fought to a very close fight. Number 2, or you know what? Go by my rankings. But number 1, Reyes, very close fight. Number 2, I have is Anthony Smith. So Anthony Smith lost the title shot, or lost in the title shot. And then he fought Alexander Gustafsson and retired him in Sweden. And then he had to get hand surgery. He's right up there and pushed Jones to a 5-round fight, even though Jones beat him quite handily. And then Thiago Santos, who some people said he won. It was a closer fight than normal, and kind of started this whole trend of, is John Jones actually human and not an alien sent to Earth to beat every single light heavyweight alive, including poor Matt Hamill with those elbows. But realistically, what happens? I mean, Bryant and Web TV, you guys bring up really good points. I think a Stipe Miocic fight makes a lot of sense. It all depends on the eye of Miocic and how he's able to recover if we get that fight. That's what I would like to see. Oliver Sell, again, what do you think of Murdoch versus Carl Roberson? I think it's a great fight. But middleweight needs young blood, and I don't get this matchup. Yeah, Carl Roberson is so much fun to watch. I'm big on the Carl Roberson train. This is a guy that's shown it time and again that he deserves to be against some tougher matchups. And maybe what I would have done with Murdoch and Roberson, but you see this with prospects every now and again. One that pops into my head is Cyril Gane and Tanner Boser. You got 2 guys coming into heavyweight. They're winning. They're young enough. And then you put them against each other. Heavyweight's so thin. Why would you do that? It's stupid. Put Tanner Boser against a guy like Abdurakhimov, and then put Cyril Gane against, I don't know, like Marcin Tabora. Keep those guys far apart. Carl Roberson and Murdoch, super fun fight, and I think a win for one of those guys really puts them over the top, and then you're fighting a ranked opponent, and Carl Roberson's fought some very game opponents in the past. But that's a really good question. I like that. Bryant Jones should stay away from heavyweight. I doubt he does well there. He would have to change up a lot of things. I mean, going up in weight class, would he still have the speed? We didn't see enough of it in that fight against Reyes, so good point. Who's cut most weight in the UFC? I think Usman. Max Holloway has said before that he cuts from like 198 to get to 145, so Max Holloway definitely has to be in that conversation. Now, my next point of contention. This is where Question Mark Kicks is going to go off the rails, and I hope you enjoy this because this is something neat. NEF 42 at 265 pounds. I've got something neat for you. There was a fight last weekend between Ross, the Ross Squatch Hilton. He was taking on Brad Lee. I'm going to set this one up. So Ross Hilton, before, in his last fight, he fought Chris Sarro, and he got knocked out. And you might know that name. It was in the first round, heavy overhand right. Sarro ended up going to BKFC and got a win there. And he's a big deal all of a sudden. He has one pro MMA fight. He's a Golden Gloves boxing champ in the state of Maine. It's neat. It's neat. I mean, Ross Hilton took some time to come back, and he's fighting Brad Lee, who's a boxer. So it's kind of like a similar matchup, testing him against what he lost against in his last fight. You might know Ross Hilton, too, if you ever looked on Jorgen De Castro's Tapology page, Sherdog page, because they fought back at NEF, I want to say it was NEF 36. I was there in Portland, Maine, for the Cruiserweight title at 225, and Jorgen De Castro knocked him out. So, very similar circumstances in some of these fights, a little susceptible to the power overhand, and then he's going to fight this guy, Brad Lee. So it was interesting because in Ross Hilton's camp, he had Chris Sarro. So I threw this one out there on Twitter. This is kind of like a Rocky Balboa, Apollo Creed. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to see heavyweights jumping up and down in the beach in crop tops, but Chris Sorrow was in his corner walking out. They hugged it out. He was behind him next to the cage when the fight took place. And I just want to show you, we'll go through rounds 1 and 2 because there's a little bit of 2 before I finish. But I just want to walk you through this because there's an element of cockiness in the way that Brad Lee composes himself. And of course, he was in the blue corner. You'll see him. Ross Hilton has some dreadlocks and he's quite a bit taller. But I was very surprised at the way that the boxer composed himself. So continue to fill up the chat over there, and we're gonna walk through this fight. All right, round number 1, and let me know if the volume's too loud here. But this is just a simple video I was able to take off the old iPhone sitting cage side. But Brad Lee, hands super low. Like, just no respect. And this is his MMA debut against a guy, albeit, maybe not the best record of 4-3, but he's fought some really tough competition. Cross-trains multiple different gyms in the Portland area. And just no respect. Just no respect. So it was interesting. I mean, round number 1, and we'll go through the 5 minutes. Pretty cat and mouse. And like I said, if you want to head into the chat, you want to talk some UFC, you want to talk some Bellator, and we'll get into the week that is. But a very, very interesting matchup. Like, I can't remember the last time I saw a guy make his pro MMA debut, hands down by his side, kicking the mat. And I mean, the fans were into this one, especially at 265 pounds. It always gets interesting at heavyweight. You never know who could put the other guy away. But this was just a real feeling out process. He had some jawing from Lee. Of course, slapping his gloves. Surprising stuff. Very surprising stuff. But you look at a guy in Hilton, karate black belt, a guy that's been there and done that in the NAF cage and elsewhere. Fought notable names, like I said, Chris Sorrow, Jorgen De Castro. And then De Castro, off of that win, comes into the UFC and beats Justin Tafa. But I mean, chess match to say the least. And it was such a weird fight because, and there you go, Lee calling an eye poke, even though referee John English just didn't see it. Blitz is in, has the crowd behind him once more. And it's just a feeling out process. I mean, clearly you've got a boxer in blue gloves taking on the longer, rangier striker in Ross Hilton. In his hometown, really. I mean, a guy from South Portland fighting in downtown Portland. But yeah, I was just surprised. Not a lot of action here. Not a whole lot going on. And the fact that you have Chris Sorrow, and you can actually see him every now and again wearing the tie-dye shirt in the background over there on the left-hand side. Interesting to see. A guy getting knocked out in the first round emphatically. I mean, Chris Sorrow landed that right hand, and it completely pummeled Ross Hilton. So for him to take on a guy like that, pure boxer, Golden Gloves boxing pedigree, and then to take on a guy like Brad Lee, who clearly demonstrates, a lack of respect for his opponent, it was just something interesting to see as we continue on with our first round here. This was third fight. Sorry, there were three. This was the third before the end. So you had this fight where now Brad Lee just absolutely going off, unleashing everything he has, throwing just power punches at Hilton. But again, Hilton with the pedigree and the experience too, obviously with the wherewithal that he probably should clinch as referee John English looks on. But it was so weird just seeing Chris Sorrow in the corner of Ross Hilton, having fought last year, and the way that the fight went down, it was fairly neat to see. Hilton continues to clinch. And you can tell, I mean, again, a boxing guy that trains in MMA versus a more well-rounded fighter. But again, Lee going hard. Hands down by his side again, which he demonstrated at the start of the fight. If you can't see it, by this point in time, Hilton's dreads had ripped. They ripped. Quite handily, they ripped. But it was a cat and mouse first round, more or less. I mean, you had a couple of flurries from Lee. Of course, Ross Hilton feeling it out. You don't want to be in a position like you were in the fight against De Castro or against Chris Sorrow. And again, Brad Lee continues to power punch. Heavy, heavy hooks. just very surprised. It's not often that you see a fighter reach out and try and grab the gloves of his opponent. Weird way to feint. Something that you're not going to see every single day. Now referee John English saying, you got to bring your fingers in. That's always a concern, especially with the fighter moving in. Yeah, it was just, I thought it was very interesting. Something different to do with Fight Night Picks question mark kicks. The way that this entire fight went, the way that this entire first round went. I mean, Brad Lee hammering away, continues to hammer away. Less than 10 seconds remaining in this round. And obviously finishing strong. And now we get into the second round. And this is where it starts to, you start to see some different looks. And of course, you only get about 1:20 into this round. And that's about all she wrote. But if we continue on, this is where you're going to see a guy downloading another's game plan and absolutely going off. Now, Lee brings his hands up in the second round. He finished strong in the first. Goes in for the flurry. Obviously gets taken down by the bigger man in Hilton. Now completely on top and mount. Now this is interesting. Lee's going to scramble out of this position if I'm not mistaken. If I remember correctly from last weekend. Getting up to his feet. A little sloppy. Hilton back on top. Lee trying to recover and get up. Hilton pummeling away now. Opportunity for a knee, but see, he didn't take it, unlike two fighters that we had on our recent UFC card. Now, Hilton really utilizing the clinch and the knees. Now we're sitting right in front of Craig Allen. And this was one of the fights that did not incur blood onto my laptop. But the fight's over. The fight is over. The fight has been stopped. Ross Hilton beat Brad Lee. Lee, of course, livid with the stoppage. I just thought that was interesting. And reason being, just the total lack of respect at the start of the fight. I mean, hands down by your side, stomping, going out and reaching for gloves. It's not something you see every day. And you know what? Looking forward to Brad Lee's return to the NEF cage if we see him again. I mean, it's a guy that trains at a Paladin, Massachusetts. Don't know if we'll see him in Maine once more. But an interesting talking point. Something different to do over on the show. Now, looking ahead and looking over to your comments, Oliver Sell says, what do you think of the antics of Henry Cejudo saying he's going to fight Aldo, then go to featherweight? I imagine his gym will get feisty considering he's got Zombie at the gym, shows his ego is gone. I don't think you're going to see Henry Cejudo at 145. I mean, he's probably going to try and tease a fight at 125, and he's going to want to unify belts when, you get the winner of Figueiredo and Benavidez. He'll probably want a shot at them. He'll probably want to fight TJ Dillashaw once more. And of course, he has a fight with Aldo. So there's all sorts of different things going on. But we're going to lump in looking ahead with your Fight Night picks because there are a lot of fights coming up. I mean, if you want to go over some of these, we have ACA 104 coming up this week. Evgeny Goncharov taking on Muhammad Vakayev. That's a name you might recognize if you're a Tanner Bozer fan. Vakayev got the better of him. He hasn't been in the cage for some time, more or less unifying the heavyweight belts. You also have a flyweight co-main event between Mansour Khatuyev taking on Azamat Karifov. We've got Bellator. We have 41 fights on tap if you go on to Tapology and look at the two Bellator cards coming up this week. 20 for Thackerville, 21 over in Dublin. Some interesting names of note. Josh Hill, former WSOF title challenger. He's going to be taking on Vinicius Zani. You've also got Kyle Krushmer, Gaston Boilanos and his crazy strikes. You've got Steve Mowry and Rudy Shafroth. That should be an awesome fight. Gabriel Vargas, the kickboxing champ, who won his MMA debut, taking on TJ Britton. Sean Bunch, great former wrestler, taking on Keith Lee, brother Kevin Lee. You got Adil Benjelani that the promotion's really pushed from Morocco. I mean, continuing up through, you have names like Carlo Pedersoli fighting Mark Lemminger. You'll recognize Carlo Pedersoli from his Cage Warriors time, his fight with Nicholas Dalby, as well as his time in the UFC. You also have Denise Kielholtz taking on Christina Warhorse Williams. Chris Lencioni taking on Salim Mukhidinov. You also have Valentin Moldavsky taking on Javi Ayala. That's a barn burner at 265. Then to add insult to injury or to add fuel to the fire, you have a great fight in Timothy Johnson. A lot of people, maybe they're low on Tim Johnson. We had an interview with him here a couple of years ago. But this is a guy who's a former state champ wrestler taking on Tyrell Fortune, who is a great wrestler. A very, very good game wrestler who's 8-0 in the Bellator cage. Brandon Gertz taking on Miles Jury, and Ed Ruth taking on Yaroslav Amasov. We have Combate as well, coming at you from Mexicali, Mexico in the main event. Rafa Garcia taking on Humberto Bandenay, that you might recognize from his time in the UFC. You've got LFA 82, Pogues taking on Polizzi in the main event for the title at 205 pounds. And now it's interesting, the question that was posed by Bryant. What do you think about a yellow card system like Pride used? Could it work in the UFC? There's Rising this weekend too. Good fights there. I know a lot of people are excited about the Mikuru Asakura and Daniel Salas fight. Roque Martinez as well taking on Hideki Sekine. And then Bellator, just more fights. More and more and more fights over in Dublin. Bandejas Malambo is a great fight. The Librarian Richard Keeley, who most recently fought Michael Venom Page taking on George Hardwick. And then if we go up closer to the top, Will F. and Fleury taking on Justin Moore. Oliver Enkamp, time in the UFC, taking on Lewis Long. Just a lot of fights. A lot of fights. And then you have the UFC in Auckland. Main event, Paul Felder, Dan Hooker, but some good ones there. In the co-main, Michael Olashechuk taking on Jimmy Crute. Now, for your Fight Night picks, the questions over there. And getting back to the yellow card. Do I think it could work? Yeah, but it gets so damn tricky. This is the thing that I'd like to see happen in 2020. The UFC has so much power. Do they start to influence the states and say, hey, let's bring in a yellow card system. Let's bring in regional judges where we can pick and choose, because that's been a problem before. You saw it in Texas. Maybe instead of Texas just having, their MMA commission or their boxing MMA commission, maybe you make it where it's West or Southwest. You include different states. Let's say you have Louisiana and you lump in New Mexico and you throw in Oklahoma, and everybody's regionalized so you can pick and choose the best judges. But a yellow card system as far as refereeing and illegal strikes, it's an interesting idea. I just wonder if they bite. And then Web TV, Frank Mir said he wants Fedor Emelianenko. That'd be a good fight. At this point in their careers, why not? Frank Mir, Roy Nelson was a dumpster fire, and Fedor Emelianenko beat Rampage in his last fight, which is kind of weird. Make it happen. But neither one of those guys have great chins. You look at the fight and it's not his chin, but Frank Mir when he fought Javier Ayala and broke the bone that keeps your teeth in place, whereas Fedor Emelianenko when he was fighting, let's say, Ryan Bader, it definitely didn't go all that great. So would I like to see that? Yeah, it makes sense. It's fun. And I think that's a good point to wrap up this week's episode of Fight Night Picks Kicks. Don't forget, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at CraigAllenFNP. There's a store, and it's revamped on the website, fightnightpicks.net. We have some neat hats. We have some neat shirts. They're over there. You can check them out. All the prices are in Canadian dollars. So if you're in the States, hey, with the exchange, you're saving about 30%. That's a good savings. And we'll ship them wherever. So I really want to thank everybody for joining in with the picks, with the show. Matt and I are going to have an episode of This Week in MMA tomorrow. We're also going to profile all of the UFC Auckland card. We're going to talk about the 2 Bellator cards as well. Last one in here, Oliver says, what division are you most excited for throughout the year? Yours is featherweight. Yeah, featherweight's pretty good. Featherweight, I agree. There's so many movers and shakers at featherweight. Welterweight's been fun lately, so is middleweight. But you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong with the product. But even featherweight, if you look over at Bellator, you get the Grand Prix too, so don't forget about that, Oliver. And Oleinik versus Ursel will fight at Web TV says Oleinik versus Verdum will fight at UFC 250. They will, and I think that fight's fair too, but I think Verdum wins it. But listen, really looking forward to it. It's going to be a busy week of MMA, and thanks so much for tuning in. Really appreciate everybody. So long, till next week.